The first thing she noticed wasn't the cold, wasn't the dark, wasn't the smell of old plastic baked by a North Dakota summer. It was the quiet. Vera Czajka had been sleeping in her car for 11 weeks when she found the tank. She'd been parking behind the co-op elevator, the one on the north edge of Bismarck that nobody used anymore. The grain elevator itself had been condemned in 2019. A long crack running up the east wall, a collapsed equipment shed, and a notice stapled to the fence that nobody had bothered to read in years. But behind the shed, sitting on a flat concrete pad like it had always been there and always would be, was a green polyethylene water tank, 8 feet across, 8 feet tall, a 24-inch threaded lid on top with a vented cap that screwed off. She'd walked past it twice a week for 2 months without thinking about it at all. Then, one night in October, temperature dropping, wind coming off the plains at something mean and personal, she thought about it. This is the story of what she did next, and it asks a question that I keep turning over and can't quite set down. How much of home is real, and how much is just the story we agree to tell about a place? Here's what most people assume about a water tank. They assume it's a barrel, primitive, dark and damp and smelling of algae and old rubber. They picture something you'd find at the bottom of a horror movie, not something a person could sleep in, cook in, keep dry in. The image that snaps into place is basically a coffin with ambitions. And that assumption is wrong, but only because we're thinking about the wrong kind of tank. Vera found a Norwesco vertical poly tank, the kind that agricultural operations use for on-site water storage, the kind you see on farms from here to Manitoba, sitting green and quiet in a field. Food-grade high-density polyethylene, UV stabilized, 8 feet in diameter, which means the interior floor space is about 50 square feet, just under the floor plan of a full-sized parking space. The walls are thick, seamlessly rotomolded, which means no seams, no cracks. The manhole lid at the top is the only way in or out. That lid, 24 inches across, is how Vera got inside the first time. She borrowed a step stool from her car trunk, stood on it, unthreaded the cap, and lowered herself down. She sat cross-legged on the bottom. She held her phone up and turned on its flashlight. The inside of the tank was a perfect sphere cut flat at the bottom. It smelled like clean plastic and nothing else. It was completely quiet. Not quiet like a house at 2 a.m., quiet like the inside of something that has never had to make a sound. The walls curved around her. The flashlight caught them and scattered a pale green light everywhere, the color of a swimming pool at the edge of its depth. Vera sat in there for 20 minutes. Then she climbed out, put the lid back on, and drove to the 24-hour gas station to get warm. She came back the next night, and the night after that. The thing you have to understand about 50 square feet is that it sounds smaller than it is. A prison cell in a federal facility runs about 60 to 70 square feet. A standard parking space is 162. A single bed takes up about 28. So 50 square feet isn't luxury, but it's not nothing. It's a circle, which actually matters. Circles have no dead corners. A rectangular room loses usable space in every corner. You have to shove furniture into the edges, or the edges just sit there collecting dust. A circular floor puts everything equidistant from the center. There's no wall that's farther away than any other wall. The psychologists who study it call it a centripetal room design, meaning it naturally draws you inward. It also means that wherever you stand, you're close to something useful. Vera is not a psychologist. She didn't know any of that. She just knew that the space didn't feel small. What it felt like, she told people later, was a yurt without the drama. She started with a sleeping bag, then a foam mat, then, and this is the part that tells you something about who Vera Czajka actually is, she started measuring. She'd worked in agricultural equipment sales for 16 years before she lost that job. The dealership she worked for went under in the consolidation wave that rolled through rural dealerships in 2017 and 2018, and she was 45, and the market for her particular set of skills had narrowed to almost nothing. She knew the specs on every piece of John Deere equipment produced between 2002 and 2018. She knew load weights, turning radii, hydraulic pressure ratings. She could read a schematic the way other people read a menu. None of that translated neatly to anything else, or at least that was how the interviews went. Her apartment went first, then her storage unit, then the car, Then, for 3 months, the car was everything. She kept it clean. She kept herself clean using the truck stop shower on Airport Road, $3 and a towel. She was not visibly disheveled. She was not visibly anything. She was a 48-year-old woman with a salt and pepper undercut and a broken zipper she held shut with a safety pin, sitting in a parking lot behind an abandoned grain elevator in October, and no one saw her at all. She found the tank. She started measuring. The first problem with living in a polyethylene water tank is not the darkness, which is solvable. It's not the cold, which is also solvable. It's not even the lid, that 24-inch opening through which a human body must somehow pass every single time. The first problem is condensation. When a warm body occupies a sealed space, that body produces moisture. Every breath you exhale is humid air. The walls of a HDPE tank conduct heat away from the interior, not fast because polyethylene is actually a modest insulator, but steadily. When the humid air inside hits the cooler walls, it drops its water. Dew forms. In October in Bismarck, that dew doesn't evaporate. It runs down the walls in pools at the curved base of the tank, and your sleeping bag soaks it up and you wake up wet. Vera figured this out on her third night. Her solution was, if you're being generous, elegant. If you're being honest, it was a foam sleeping pad cut to fit the curved floor, with a second pad lifted off the base on 3 sections of 2x4 lumber she'd found in the collapsed shed. Air gap between the pad and the floor. The moisture still forms, but it runs down the walls to the base and pools there, below the platform she'd built, and she's sleeping above it. She also cut a 1-inch hole in the tank wall. She had a spade bit and a cordless drill, at a point just above floor level. A short length of clear vinyl tubing, plugged with a wooden dowel when she was inside, open when she was out. The tank breathes. The moisture moves, not perfectly, not even close to perfectly, but enough. She plugged the hole with a piece of waterproof silicone caulk around the tubing and the tank never leaked. Here's where the analogy everyone reaches for starts to fail them. People hear water tank and they think submarine, cramped, pressurized, dark, smelling of diesel and unwashed men. The sub-analogy holds for about 2 minutes, and then it breaks completely, because Vera's tank had none of those constraints. It wasn't pressurized, it wasn't moving. The walls weren't metal. They were food-grade polyethylene, which means they're chemically inert and have a thermal mass roughly similar to a thin layer of concrete. The tank could hold heat if heat existed to hold. And that's the thing the sub-analogy misses. A submarine's problem is containment, keeping the outside out. A tank's challenge is accumulation, gathering what warmth is available and not letting it bleed away. Once Vera understood that, her mind went somewhere specific. She thought about grain bins. She'd spent 16 years selling equipment to farmers. She knew exactly what grain bins were designed to do: hold a large mass of material, grain, which is an excellent thermal storage medium, inside a sealed metal structure. In summer, grain bins use the thermal mass of the grain itself to stay cool. In winter, the grain is warmer than the air around it, and the bin holds that warmth. A properly sealed grain bin in January will stay notably warmer inside than the outside air, not because of any heater, but because of the mass of material inside and the insulation that seals it. She was the mass of material. She was the grain. October ended with a sleeping platform, a condensation drain, a vent hole, and a small hook screwed into the wall from which she hung a battery-powered camp lantern. The inside of the tank glowed faintly green when she turned it on. She'd lined the first 3 feet of wall with strips of closed-cell foam, the kind used to insulate plumbing pipes sold in 4-foot lengths at the hardware store for about 90 cents each. She'd cut them into sections and glued them with contact cement. It wasn't architectural insulation, but it changed the feel of the wall from cold to the touch to not cold, which was not a small thing. She was spending $60 a month on supplies, paid in cash. The tank cost her nothing because nobody owned it. The property had been in probate since the estate of the original co-op's last owner had gotten tangled in a dispute between heirs who hadn't spoken in a decade. The fence had a padlock on it that Vera had opened with a bolt cutter she found in the equipment shed. She put a new padlock on it, same color, similar brand, and kept the key. She had a locking door. It just happened to be a gate. Winter in Bismarck is not casual. January averages around -8 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind doesn't add to the cold so much as it translates it directly into your nervous system. The gas station on Airport Road had closed their outdoor restrooms at night after someone broke the soap dispenser. Vera had adapted her car to winter sleeping already, a Mylar emergency blanket under her sleeping bag, 2 wool blankets on top, boots left inside the bag with her feet so they didn't freeze stiff. But she was burning through fuel, idling the engine for heat, and she couldn't do that forever. The tank was warmer than the car. Not much warmer, not warm in any absolute sense. But 50 square feet of sealed space with one human body producing about 80 watts of metabolic heat is actually a measurable thermal advantage over a car interior that leaks through every door seal and window. The tank's polyethylene walls don't transfer cold as aggressively as car glass. The foam lining helped. The platform kept her off the conductive base. She ran a temperature check one night. Outside was 7 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the car was 11 degrees. Inside the tank, 22 degrees. 22 degrees is still brutally cold. Don't misunderstand me. This is not a success story about comfort. It is a success story about not freezing. She added more insulation, a sleeping bag rated to -20, wool blankets stuffed between the foam strips and the tank wall, adding dead air pockets, a chemical hand warmer tucked into the toe of the bag each night. She started eating a hot meal before she went in each night because the body generates heat from digestion, and she needed every thermal advantage she could find. February came and she was sleeping 6, sometimes 7 hours straight without waking from cold. She didn't tell anyone. Not for the first year. This is the part that people get wrong when they hear the story. They assume the secrecy was about shame, that she hid in the tank because she couldn't face anyone knowing. And maybe that's part of it. She's the first to say she doesn't have the complete answer. But the larger part, the part she could name when she tried, was simpler. She'd found something that was working, and the single greatest threat to something working is attention. People who notice a woman climbing out of a water tank on an abandoned property don't quietly move on. They call someone. The someone who gets called sends someone else. The someone else has a form to fill out and a box to check, and a procedure to follow, and the procedure doesn't end with a woman keeping her tank. It ends with a woman sleeping in a car again. So she was careful. She came and went in the dark. She parked 2 blocks away and walked. She never lit a fire. She kept the lantern pointed away from the scenes. She wore dark clothing. She was invisible in the way that middle-aged women in working-class neighborhoods are often invisible, completely and without effort. The lock on the gate looked like it belonged. The equipment shed blocked the sight line from the road. Nobody came. By spring of her first year, the tank had a sleeping platform, a small folding shelf attached to the wall with 2 stainless steel bolts, a lantern, and a hook rack holding her tools. She cooked on a single-burner propane camp stove that she kept outside the tank, never inside, because propane combustion produces carbon monoxide, and a sealed tank is not a forgiving environment for CO. She ate outside, sitting on the concrete pad. In the dark, that was the loneliest part, she said later. Not the sleeping, the sitting outside in the dark eating soup from a metal cup. Spring in North Dakota is its own kind of mercy. The days stretched. The frozen ground thawed. The abandoned lot filled with birds she couldn't name, which she found oddly embarrassing given how many years she'd spent working with farmers who could name everything. She started a list, a piece of notebook paper that she kept folded in the breast pocket of her canvas jacket. On it were 2 columns, what the tank had, what she wanted it to have. The second column was longer. Running water of any kind, a way to charge her phone without driving to a library, a floor that didn't curve, a way to hang her clothes so they didn't mildew, a light source that didn't eat through D batteries in 4 days. She started working down the list, one thing at a time, one payday at a time. She'd found work by then, cash jobs, 3 of them running at once. Mornings, she cleaned the back rooms at a feed store. The owner paid her under the table and didn't ask where she lived. Afternoons, she picked up shifts at a car wash, the kind where people pull up and she hand-dried the cars with a chamois. Evenings, she did data entry for a logistics company that didn't require her to come into an office. Just submit accurate spreadsheets, which she could do on her phone at a library before the library closed. The money wasn't much, but her expenses were, honestly, almost nothing. She wasn't paying rent. The second column on her list started to shorten. The floor came first. Not a literal flat floor. You can't put a flat floor in a tank with a curved base without engineering something complicated. But a platform built up from the curved base on 2x6 treated lumber risers. The platform topped with a sheet of 3/4-inch plywood, cut circular to fit the interior diameter. She'd measured the tank's interior with a tape measure, 92 inches across, and had a friend at the lumber yard, a woman she'd met through the feed store, name of Gretchen, who asked no questions, cut the plywood circle for her on a bandsaw. The plywood platform cost her $40. She carried it to the tank strapped to the roof of her car. She lowered it through the 24-inch lid in sections. She'd had Gretchen cut it in 2 half circles and assembled it inside with wood screws. The 2 halves butted together at the center with a strip of aluminum angle iron she'd salvaged from the equipment shed. She stood on it. It didn't flex. She stood on it again. She stood on it and looked at the curved walls and the lantern light and the foam strips and the shelf with its 2 stainless bolts, and she thought, this is a room. That's the misconception the grain bin analogy actually breaks. We assume that room is an architectural designation, that what makes something a room is a building permit and 4 corners and a certificate of occupancy. But the word room is older than that. It comes from Old English rum, meaning space. Just space. The space you need. The space that's yours. What Vera had was 50 square feet of hers. The walls curved, the ceiling domed. There were no corners to accumulate shadows. The floor was 2 half circles of plywood joined at the center with a salvaged strip of aluminum. The door was a 24-inch hatch in the roof that she'd learned to swing herself through in one practiced motion. Hands on the rim, arms locking, body dropping, like climbing out of a pool from the deep end, except inverted. She stopped thinking of it as a tank. She started thinking of it as hers. The electricity came in the form of a 100-watt solar panel she bought second-hand for $85 from a man selling it out of his garage, who had bought it years ago with intentions that had not survived contact with reality. She ran the cable through a second small hole in the tank wall, sealed again with silicone caulk, down to a salvaged 12-volt battery, the kind that sits inside an uninterruptible power supply for an office computer, available at electronics recycling centers for next to nothing. A charge controller she found at the same garage sale for $12. The system put out enough power for an LED strip she'd stapled around the interior circumference of the tank, about halfway up the curved wall. When it was on, the inside of the tank glowed a warm amber, not green, not the pale swimming pool light of the old camp lantern. Amber, warm, domestic. She charged her phone. She submitted her spreadsheets. She read library e-books. She was in the most important functional senses, living. Her second year in the tank ended with the list in her jacket pocket looking like this: running water, gravity-fed system from 5-gallon jug, tube, to catch basin. That was her solution. A 5-gallon food-safe jug mounted high on the wall, 2 lag bolts into the tank wall, a plywood bracket she'd built, connected by a short length of vinyl tubing to a catch basin below. She pressed on the tube near the top of the jug to create a siphon. Water fell. She called it a faucet, and technically she was not wrong. Washing dishes meant a basin. Washing herself meant a sponge bath at the gas station. Still, which she'd been doing for 2 years, and which she considered the most degrading part of all of it. Not the tank, not the secret, not any of it, but the particular quality of a sponge bath in a fluorescent-lit single-person restroom at 2 in the morning. She put shower on the list, left it there. Some things take longer. The neighbors who didn't know she was there were 2 things simultaneously: a threat and a kind of strange company. A property management company drove past the fence every 3 months, visually checked the lock, and logged the site as secure and undisturbed. She knew this because she'd watched them, twice, from behind the equipment shed. The padlock she'd put on was the same brand as the one she'd cut, the same color. She'd bought it at the same hardware chain, same model number. If anyone checked the serial numbers, a pair of Canada geese nested on the concrete pad in her second spring. She watched them from inside the tank through a second small hole she'd drilled at eye level when lying down. Not a vent hole, just a quarter-inch hole that let her see a sliver of the outside. They were hostile as geese are. They hissed at her when she climbed down in the mornings. She brought them a piece of bread once, and the larger one took it and then chased her back to the tank. She named them. The larger one she called Carl. The smaller one she called the other one. Carl and the other one were gone by June. She was still there. In her 3rd year, she got a job, a real one, with a paycheck. A dealership in Mandan, 15 minutes across the bridge, needed someone who could read equipment specs and talk to farmers without condescension. She walked in, handed them a resume she'd written on the library's printer, and sat in the manager's office in her clean canvas jacket with its safety pin zipper, and answered every question with the flat, specific authority of someone who knew exactly how much a 9-row corn head weighs and why that matters for a loader tractor's hydraulic requirement. She started the following Monday. She did not move out of the tank, not right away. She wanted a deposit saved. She wanted to know the job was real. She wanted, and this is the part she found hardest to explain, she wanted to be ready. There's a particular kind of readiness that only comes from having built something with your own hands in your own time, against circumstances that were actively working against you. She wasn't sure she'd found it yet. She went to work in Mandan every day and came back to a 50-square-foot circular room on a concrete pad behind an abandoned co-op elevator, with a plywood floor and amber LED lights and a gravity-feed water jug and a solar system she'd built from a garage sale and a charge controller she'd talked down to $10. She cooked outside on the propane stove and watched the Bismarck sky go dark. The leaving, when it finally came, was quiet. She'd saved enough for a first and last month on a studio apartment, 380 square feet, which seemed, she said later, almost irresponsibly large. She signed the lease on a Tuesday. She moved out of the tank over the course of 2 nights, which is to say she carried her belongings to her car in a series of trips that took about 40 minutes total, because she'd never had very much. She left the plywood floor. She left the LED strip. She left the foam insulation on the walls. She left the solar panel. She couldn't figure out how to take it down without a second person, and she didn't want a second person involved. She left the folding shelf with its 2 stainless steel bolts. She left the gravity feed water bracket. She put the lid back on. She locked the gate. She drove to the studio apartment in Mandan and sat on the floor of the empty kitchen for a while. Not for any dramatic reason, just because the lease didn't start until the following day and she'd moved her things in early. The floor was flat. All the walls met at right angles. The ceiling was white and horizontal and completely unremarkable in every way. She sat there and thought about the tank. 3 years. What I keep coming back to is not the engineering. The foam, the plywood, the siphon faucet. All of that is interesting, but it's not the thing. A sealed polyethylene tank is not hospitable. It doesn't invite you in. It doesn't have a kitchen or a thermostat or a bathroom down the hall. It doesn't come with any of the agreements that a landlord and a tenant make about what a space is supposed to be. But it can hold warmth if you build the warmth in. It can hold light if you string it yourself. It can hold a particular weight of 3 years of carefully assembled life, a plywood floor, a shelf, an amber glow, a gravity feed faucet, a 1/4-inch hole that let a woman watch 2 geese she named Carl, and the other one. The part that doesn't fit neatly anywhere is this. It was habitable because she made it habitable, not because someone decided it was, not because it met a standard, because she paid close attention to what it needed and then went to the hardware store and fixed it. That's not inspiring in some abstract way. That's just true and a little hard to sit with. She made it well because she paid attention, and when she left it better than she found it, which is, it turns out, just about the oldest definition of tenancy there is. The tank is still out there. The probate dispute over the property was finally settled in 2024. The heirs, 2 brothers, a sister, none of whom had ever seen the property, decided to sell. A developer bought the parcel in March of that year, planning a row of storage units. They sent a crew to clear the site. The crew reported back, someone had been living in the water tank, long-term. The plywood floor was still in there, the LED strip, the shelf, a gravity feed water bracket made from 2 lag bolts and a piece of plywood that nobody recognized as a plumbing system until they looked at it for a minute. The project manager who told this story to a reporter from the Bismarck Tribune said they'd discussed whether to clean it out and sell the tank. Standard food-grade poly tanks in good condition sell for $200 to $300 at agricultural auctions. They didn't sell it, they left it on the site intact, while the storage units went up around it. The reporter asked why. The project manager thought about it for a second. He said, because someone had put a lot of work into making it something it wasn't supposed to be, and that felt like it deserved to stay. I've thought about that project manager's answer for longer than makes any logical sense. He wasn't being sentimental. Or maybe he was. I genuinely don't know. What he was saying, stripped down, is that someone had put enough of themselves into a piece of plastic that the evidence of it deserved to stay, that the work was real, that the room was real, even if no room was supposed to be there. Vera Czajka needed a home. She found a tank. She made over 3 years through condensation problems in a winter that dropped to -8 and geese named Carl and the other one, something that satisfied that need. The thing she made wasn't in any building code. It didn't have a certificate of occupancy. It had a 24-inch hatch and a gravity feed faucet and 2 stainless steel bolts and amber light. And when the crew found it, they left it. I don't have a clean way to end this. I've tried. The best I can do is say, we've always been a little confused about what makes a place real. We keep reaching for permits and addresses and floor plans as proof. Vera had a different answer. She built hers inside a thing the rain never touched.